Hello. There we are. Now it's working. Just yeah, we're a little bit late today and having some other technical issues on top of that with the audio. As you can see, it's a different camera view for today. I'm going through quite some changes with the whole setup here. And yeah, just trying to switch it up, optimize it, make it better. And some unforeseen things have happened, but we're here. Let's get it going. Let's not talk about it anymore. So it's actually going to be a very condensed session I'm going to do. It's going to be pretty short. And I'm only going to be doing a very abstract sort of scene inspired by some of the things I get that I've seen recently on social media. I'm going to go on Behance and pull up a quick reference, or yeah, we'll go to Behance, and off of Behance, from that sort of abstract render, we'll try to replicate something like that. And the main thing for this session that I want to get out is things that I do that really speed up the workflow, like the process of putting something together. Doing everything from scratch right away doesn't quite make sense when there's other ways that you could put, a scene together for rendering fairly quickly by using many tools at your disposal and little tricks. And then if needed to customize or needed to make things specific, you can then use your own work as reference, right? There's this practice that's always very recommended when learning 3D, which is restart your project, right? At one point when you're like 80% through, ask yourself, really, would it be better to just restart, right? And how long would it take me to do exactly what I've done to this point? So let's get right into it. I'm going to switch my screen over. Hopefully I do it to the right one. Should be, not yet, right here. Okay. So we've got Blender here. Let's quickly just bring up ourselves right here into the browser, and we'll go to Behance. And the reason I'm going to Behance is I find, you just find more quality work very easily. So I don't have to go fishing for things, or, some of the things in social media don't quite have the same sort of product presentation that we see on a place like this. So we'll go ahead and just kind of scroll through. Like, this is fairly nice. I've been thinking a lot about doing sort of glass reflections. So doing something abstract like this, like some tech wallpaper thing, could be really cool. So let's say, yeah, that's right there. There's our prompt right away. Let's get some wallpaper design going for a cell phone. So we'll go ahead and come back to Blender. And we first want to set up our camera view. So I'm going to delete everything that we have here except for the camera. I'm going to go into the top view and slightly move out of the flat view after clicking on Z, and do Control-Alt-0 in order to get that camera looking from above. It's just a quicker way so that I can then select that camera, and over on Properties, set the coordinates to 0, 0 on the Y, and I'll bring an even number for the Z axis, let's say 10. Just easier to work in those increments if we're going abstract with it, and we don't have to necessarily be concerned with real life measurements. Just having things easily scalable, so just using ones and tens and such, makes it easy. Hello EM, thanks for dropping in a message. Always good to have you. And I'll set all my rotations to 0 so we have a perfectly flat camera looking down. And I'll break that off over here so we could see it at all times. So that's the first thing, is we want to make sure that we're always able to check on our render's progress over here. I'll go ahead and rotate it. Actually, not rotate it. I'm going to go over here and switch the values for the dimensions so that, there we go, it's a portrait shot, and it just fits a bit better over here on the left hand side, especially for the format we're going in, which is that cell phone wallpaper. That's basically what we're going to go for. And we can just start adding some things into our scene. So one thing I highly recommend is getting your asset browser organized. how do you do that? Well, there's tons of videos online. I covered it in one live stream before on not setting it up, but cleaning it up, which is also, very similar. But essentially, if we go over into our asset browser, we can save different materials and different objects to use. So I actually have, which I'm not seeing here, a soft model pack that I downloaded from Ducky 3D. And if I open a new Blender instance, I can bring that up. Although it doesn't quite make sense for it not to show up in my asset browser as I had that set up. We're gonna have to go fishing for it. So another useful thing to do is have all your resources that you're gonna be able to use in a scene, if not in your asset browser, or obviously you want to have them neatly organized into some library that you have always saved on your computer. So a lot of the plugins I use allow me to download things off the internet within Blender, but having a resources folder like I do here, and then having a 3D section that has all these things categorized in whatever way makes sense to you. I find that I changed this many, many times over many years until I landed on this method. We go down to props, and the pack that I'm talking about from Ducky 3D is the soft models pack. So we can search right here for, there we go, the soft model pack. We'll open that up. And there we have them. So I can see over here that they are marked as assets. So I'm not quite sure why it's not letting me drop it into the other one. It is only in the current file, and it should be showing. Oh, I see. That's because, let's take it back to basics then. I switched the structure of my reference files. So this is all done from the file paths right here. And rather than having it into my 98 Blender folder, since I'm just purely working out of Blender lately, I've moved everything into a main 3D folder. So I should have all our 3D objects that are in there set as assets. It's updating because it's quite a bit. But essentially, if we look at the other file, as long as this file lives within the directory that we just set, it's going to be able to show up as an asset if it's marked as an asset. In order to do that, you right click on the object and you set it as mark as asset, or you can clear those assets if you want to take them away. But this soft model pack from Ducky 3D, I'll leave a link in the description or as a comment post the stream. But I forget if it's paid or if it was free or if it was on promotion, but either way, it's just nice to have as a set of props to use. So having model packs ready to be able to mock something up is first, right? There's also many plugins that you can use within Blender itself. So there's extra objects, which comes within Blender, and you just have to activate it here from the preferences. So you can hit add mesh extra objects. And what that allows for is if you hit Shift A and you go over to your mesh, you don't just have these regular shapes. You also have things down here like torus objects, which are like twisted torus or a torus knot, gears, diamond shapes. So it just makes it real easy to just start putting things in and start seeing how they look in front of the camera, creating a composition really, really quickly. So we'll go ahead and save our file. And do so right here. All right. We're back in on the 21st. And so once we have our models, which really you could start modeling. A lot of people start learning Blender by learning how to model. But for me, actually, I started learning how to render. So by learning how to render first and learning, then working backwards from there, lighting, textures, and now it's like I'm really tackling modeling. I mean, it really sort of lended itself to, okay, well, how do we get to, you know, the best result as quickly as possible, right? Because models I could just use, or I can like use whatever software I'm more accustomed to be comfortable modeling, and just use Blender for what it's great for, which is, I mean, in my opinion, rendering and animating very, very easily. So I see that my camera, or my view, is kind of covering me quite a bit. So I'm just gonna make myself a tad bit smaller there. Okay. So as I was saying, first things first, once we have our camera set in our position and we start, you know, dropping things in, the first thing is a composition. So we could use the center, or we could go into our camera settings by selecting the camera and then going over here to camera, going down to viewport display, composition guides, and then breaking this up into thirds, setting a center line and diagonal lines. So if you could see right over the diamond shape here. Jeez, come on now. There we go. Keyboard unlinked. All right. So we can see there we have those guidelines for the camera on the composition. So for example, it may be more interesting to place this closer on this thirds line and following that diagonal line rather than dead on in the center. Maybe have it point upwards a bit more and align with that diagonal line. And it's not that I necessarily want to use that bit, but I could copy some from over here. Let's do some of the more abstract ones. So we could do this one. We could do the curve, can yield some interesting results. And let's get some of these hollow ones. So we'll copy those objects and just bring them over. It says my acid browser is all glitching out. I just have to relink it, but I'd rather just keep moving forward since I've already covered the acid browser before. There's a new version of Blender coming in soon also. 3.5 just went from alpha to beta, I believe, or it's close. And that's gonna bring in some interesting things. They really broke through with Blender when they started adding like a new physics engine, and they completely redid the rendering, so it literally from one version to the next just became like 3 times faster and better, really. Okay, so let's set up something like what we saw over there with these shapes. So we could do, for example, it'd be kind of cool to do something with this one here, and then just copy it over and rotate it almost like, you know, they're going with the shape of the camera, or like it's some type of UI placed there. Cool. This could be something that's sort of like even animated, right? Like it's somehow interacting or coming off of. I'm gonna get rid of the diamond. It was a nice idea, but I wanna or just something I dropped in and then took my time with adding it to the composition. But if I just want to use this shape, let's say, and now these are the interesting ones. I can start rotating these in 3D rather than just being straight on from the camera. And yeah, using my perspective lines and using the depth to really set up a good composition. I don't know if it quite would apply in this case. I guess just in certain ones, it would apply that you want to have something in the foreground and something in the background so that you can bring your item into focus. So for example here, we have just like a faded color, like a gradient in the background. And it can probably just be a flat surface, or like here we could see kind of some ripples, unless they're ripples created by the actual geometry here, but it's just a blank color or with a gradient. So we can just do something similar to that, because you can see also, again, it's like if you have something in the background or in the foreground, you want to blur it out with the camera effects. So having a gradient is kind of also serving that same purpose, where you kind of have a blurred or a softer quality to the things that are further away and things that are too close, right? So you can bring what's in the midground into focus. So going back into Blender, I can do something neat with this, rotate it a bit like that, and kind of have it hooping through this one. All right. Be a cool animation to do. If I had my timeline, I'm just gonna mock it up really quick. Again, just trying to be efficient. If you're gonna set up a 3D render for a still image, great. But I always find there's a really easy way to just kind of turn that into an animation. And since video is king and has been for quite a while, it's kind of like you might as well just take a moment to either with the plugin that I showed, the Botanique, which has animated trees, like if you're doing an exterior scene or whatever it is that you're doing, you can just animate the trees. And like instead of everything being still, at least the trees are moving. In this case, I can just quickly move this thing around so that I can have it wrapping around the shape of this thing. There's probably a better way to go about this, like using a edge camera path, but I kind of want to just take a quick stab at it. I see here that I gotta realign to the object. I think it'd be even more helpful if I had another view here. There we go. We got the top view, we got the Y view, and then we got the X view. There we go. So I can just jump around and set all these keyframes to yellow. Right? So you see it there. I kind of am tempted to finish it now. I don't want it to just stay. And I've done quite a bit of animations really simple like this, so I don't know if that timing that I got where it sort of sped up there, it was kind of interesting, more than just following the path of it and then having it slow down. Ooh, there's some rotation, weird rotational thing here happening. Move that back down there. There we go. We can just add intermediary keyframes to fix it if we need to. I kind of like ended up slowing it down on the shorter sides and speeding it up on the long sides. So I don't know if I did that subconsciously or well, I did do it subconsciously, but I wonder if it's from having done this quite a few times already and just kind of jumping around. Again, it's mocking it up, so we're not trying to make it perfect, we're not trying to make it super clean. It's just a matter of like getting the concept across to see if we even like it. Right? So there we go. All right. That's clean enough for now. I don't have to concern myself with making it perfect at the moment. We just have a little bit of motion going on. So with that, let's go ahead and set up our lighting. Now that we have a composition, it's pretty much working for us, and we can continue to tweak, but go ahead and add the background plane. Move that under. And something I can do to finish it off is add some spheres, just as like little glass droplets, like really small ones, all throughout, and really close to camera. I lost it. There we go. Right there. So the reason we're doing that is it just adds a little bit of, I don't want to say noise, that's not the right thing, but foreground element. It's just adding more depth. So like by having these little things almost look like they're floating close to the camera, they could be like simulating or resembling the effect of water droplets on a camera lens. There we go. Okay. Now if we go into our camera and we click over here, and on camera we hit, where is it? Depth of field. And we can click on our focus object, which should be our center object there. And then we can lower our f-stop. Ooh, so that our objects get out of focus. And in order to see it out of focus in this view, we have to bring this a little bit wider. We can get rid of that secondary view. We don't need it anymore. And with our viewport options here, viewport shading, we can click on depth of field. And now we see that the spheres have blurred out a little bit. I'll show you a little bit clearer by exaggerating it. So if I lower the f-stop even more, we see there the spheres are clear, the sphere is blurry. So if we blur them out, they kind of just become these little elements that can distort light and color in the foreground. And then we have our background, which we'll want to move far enough so that it's out of focus as well. But we'll concern ourselves with that later. Okay, so we have a composition going. And it can be tweaked further on, but this is just for a quick proof of concept. We have that set. So moving on would be our lighting. Our lighting is more important than our textures. Starting from textures can be a little tricky because textures may look good when you're like previewing them. But it's really the lighting that's going to drive the majority of the quality of the render. So you want to pick your materials also according to the color that you end up with because of the lighting. So that's why it's going to take preference. With that scene there, I set it to cycles and GPU. We'll go over to our world settings and we can do one of two things. In our world, we can bring in something from a plugin such as BlenderKit. We can go into the HDR section and we can search something for like studio. We can find some studio lighting, so that's pretty nice. We can just go with that. We're not going to see the background, so I'll pick a lower resolution version of the background image. And if I see in 3D, I have basically the lighting stolen out of this room, and it's being projected onto this all white object. Now, I'm going to lower the intensity of this so that it's just barely giving us some very soft shading. Right? That's really only providing the soft shadows. Because then what we're going to do is we're going to add in some lights so that they can really get some dramatic effects going on. So you can also, in order to have the lights just work to your advantage, you can pick one of these objects to focus the light on. So this light, I'll go over here to Object Constraints. And I'll hit track 2, hit the eyedropper, and I can say like hit that corner piece. So this one here, I'm gonna hit this corner piece with this light. So I'm gonna move it opposite to it, and I'm gonna increase its intensity. There we go, and give it a bit of cool tone or warm tone. We can even just go with something a bit warmer. All right, and then I'll go ahead and duplicate that light and go back to Object Constraints, and instead of tracking to that one, we'll track onto the other one. So to make sure they're not competing, we can go to Top View and not fully place them opposite to each other because that can be kind of weird. But the secondary light, just bring it somewhere around off to the side of your main view. And then I'm also going to bring it down lower so that it hits the side there. So our world settings are what we would call a fill light. This main light over here that we set up, creating this diagonal, is our key light. And then this side light here is our highlight. And the way I would use a highlight typically, it varies. But I might bring the spread all the way down so that it becomes a really harsh light. Here you can see what that light is doing a bit clearer. If I look through the view of the light, here's a light with a wide spread, And then as the spread of the light gets narrower, it starts sort of having a sharper cone and creating sharper shadows. So we go back to our camera view. That's what that's looking like, which the highlight is overpowering the key light now, because with the lower spread, the power of the light becomes more concentrated. So even though it has the same intensity, because it has a lower spread, it's brighter. So we'll bring up our key light to generally light the scene a little bit more. And there we go. To our highlight, we'll give it a little bluish tone. Or, yeah, blue. So we have a warm tone coming from the top, and we have a blue tone over here. We could even change the top light now to something more abstract, like a purple, and have like a purple and blue scene going on. Adding more color on this one, and more spread. Nice. So yeah, the highlight will work more in your favor if you use different color lights, if you're going for something abstract like this. There we go. Kind of light it from the front a little bit more. Nice. Then we get more definition and shadow. So there's also a bit of a hierarchy going on with the image now, which is nice from the composition. We have a bit, actually maybe we have a bit too much detail going on the top right. So maybe I'll add just another sphere in the foreground over here to cover up our ramp over here. There we go. Just to kind of balance out the image. Now that we have our lighting, our composition, we're gonna go ahead and start adding some texture. So we'll go with something abstract. I know it looks nothing like the reference. I wasn't going to literally copy like these liquid sort of droplets that are reflecting so much light, but I was gonna more just go for what we were looking at in terms of lighting and what we're looking at in terms of material and composition and background. Like, why is this image working? And let's break that down and sort of replicate it over here. So in order to now really start experimenting with what our reference has given us, we need a reflective material. So again, I recommend using a material library. So you can have a plugin such as Ducky 3Ds. Again, shout out to him for his real-time materials. And we can use some of the ones that he has here under abstract. Actually, he has a ton of different abstract, different types of reflective materials, translucent materials. But I'm actually going to go into Blender Kit for this one, because I can search under materials as well. And I can search for glass. And there's a whole bunch of free options and paid options that you can choose from. But there's generally just a bit more variety because you have access to a larger community. I do like Ducky's 3D set, though, when it's less abstract. Like for my general daily purposes, I usually will go to that one. And just to also have some consistency and derive from that one kit, that one main go-to kit that I might use. Here we go, coated funky glass. But then, you know, in certain cases like this one, you run into something that really calls in for what you're trying to do. So that is awesome. We're on the right track. This one, this ring here, will use something from Ducky's because I want to make it solid and maybe emit some more light into the scene. So I could add maybe this one. We'll see how that looks. Maybe it's a bit too intense for what we got going on. If I change the color, am I going to like it more? Let's see. If I come down here and I can tweak the hue of the material, maybe make it a lot softer, much less strength. No, I think we're not picking the right thing here. So we'll switch back, go into abstract, and we can do something that's highly reflective. Maybe this one that's called glitter. Increase the reflectivity of it, or change the scale of the glitter. In this case, I'll make the number larger, which should turn the glitter smaller. There we go. And I'll go into my shader editor, and it's good to know just when doing materials, it's good enough to just know how to manipulate the shader editor, not necessarily how to create your own materials. So if you downloaded someone's material and you see this block here that's a dark green and that's it, like you can't really seem like you can edit it much, you can click on this top right here or hit tab with it selected, and you can see the actual full group, right, where we're looking at as a group. And really, you just have to be able to know what these nodes do. So you'll always see a shader node, which has this light green. So here we have just all these different qualities that may be data plugged in from somewhere else, but we can control a little bit of what we have going on here. So for example, the sheen, I could add some sheen to get a bit more highlights off the reflections. I can add a clear coat to also bump that up. And the roughness, which would determine how smooth this object is controlled by this thing we call a color ramp. So really just moving the black and white values here is going to mess with that level of reflectivity. All right, we'll select a material for our spheres as well, and we're going to make it the same material as this main object here. So we'll hit link materials. Now I think my camera is like way too out of focus because the spheres are basically just blobs. So I'm going to bring back some focus into the camera from the depth of field settings. A little bit more. There we go. So we can start to see some of the detail come in on the sphere, such as just the highlight that we'd be getting off of it there from the light. Maybe a bit higher. Yep, and we're also going to click there, go over to our material, and see if we can't change the color of the sphere. So we can also make that a bit more purplish. But in order to do so, we also want to create a new material. So here we could see this material, the coated funky glass, is being used by two objects. It's being used by this sphere and the main shape here in the back. So I'll select all these other spheres and then link them to that material as well with Control L. And by selecting this shape last, click on this one here and now hit new material. By clicking this symbol here, that basically looks like copying. And here I can tweak the color and the coat weight, the strength. There we are. Now we need something for the background and for these two elements off on the side. So for the elements on the side, oh, we also were forgetting about this one here. I feel like I should try other things other than the glitter. I'm not 100% satisfied with it. Perhaps even we can use a bit more of an abstract one with this, such as the blue light. And then on this one, I noticed there was a one called Ghost, which looks like an emissive, volume material. So, oh, it's actually not. It's a surface, and it is lit up as well. But I like that. It's much softer. It's adding more light, more interesting qualities to the scene. So there we are. We'll keep that there. And then these, we can actually pick a solid. So we'll go back to abstract, and maybe we'll still make it something reflective, such as these. If I can't change the hue, which I can, so we can make it something that fits the scene a bit better. So if I make this whole foreground blue, and I made these little pebbles in the front a pink or a magenta, then I'm going to do the same thing for the back. I'm going to just make this into a sort of magenta background. In order to do that, I shouldn't have gotten out of my camera view. In order to sort of create that type of gradient that we were seeing earlier, I'm going to move this further away. And we already talked a little bit about the color ramp. So the easiest way for this is really going to be to create a new material for this one with the shader editor here. I can hit new shader. And under base color, I can add that color ramp. Paste it in there. Now we don't see much of anything happening to it. If I crunch it up, it only turns pitch black, right? That's because we need to add an additional one, which is a gradient texture, right? So we're kind of working at this backwards. we're putting in a gradient so that we can plug that into color ramp. But color ramp is generally what's going to be able to control any texture that you throw on there. So if I throw in a noise texture, or if I hit Shift A and I go over into textures, we have wave, we have noise, we have sky, magic, image, etc. So I could hit noise, and if I hit noise, I could hit Control Shift Click to preview that one, and there's our noise. However, if I plug this into the color ramp, I can modify the intensity of that noise. So that's basically what we're doing here. We have a gradient. There we go. We'll plug that in, and we can control where our gradient, or how intense our gradient is. So there's a straight line, and then there's a softer gradient if it's pushed up all the way. But it seems like the black portion is completely off of the object, right? So that's when it comes in handy to have a plugin called Node Wrangler. So if you go to Edit, Preferences, and enable Node Wrangler, it brings in a lot of shortcuts for your node-based systems, which are these blocks that connect to each other. And so what we just added here is basically the data for how the image is applied onto that surface. And we have brought in a mapping node. And with a mapping node, we can just use location to change where that gradient is applied, or where that line starts. So we can even soften this more by adding another color to the color ramp and making that like a dark gray. And then we can decide where that dark gray is going to end or where it's going to start. You can also go here from linear to cardinal, makes it sharper. B-spline makes it softer. And then go back to our mapping and rotate it so we get something a bit more interesting going on. Whoop. Yeah, sometimes you might want to move the numbers very, very softly. And we can change the colors right on the color ramp. So I can make this the light purple that we wanted it to be. And we can make this one a light blue. Or a deep blue. I like the deep blue for that side. Okay. So just about here, we've done some interesting things. We've set up a quick composition with the camera. We threw in some props as models. And we just mocked this up with some textures to kind of see how this overall scene ends up looking. All that within, let's see, how long did that take? So that was, I don't remember quite when I started, but so far we've been streaming for 40 minutes. And with a little bit of an explainer there in the beginning. But if you talk about this being, you know, something to mess with as a concept, right? You could spend now a bit more time tweaking things such as how the camera moves through the animation, how the shape deforms, where is the light hitting it, what are the reflective qualities of the material. But when you first test out an idea to put it together and see how to continue pursuing it, you know, what does it take to get to just this main image? Right, this one first pass at it. And I'm sure that none of these that we're seeing here are the first pass, right? Roman Bratsky, great job on your color exploration. And in order to do alternatives on color, we could kind of change the material. I mean, there's a few ways to go about that. If we wanted to use the animation still, we could go into the timeline. And although we have some motion going on, we can select this object. And over on the right-hand side, we have its material open. And any element that has this symbol next to it, we can keyframe. So if I keyframe that, move forward, I can make it purple over here. And then hit the keyframe again, or hit I on the keyboard to set a keyframe. And I can have it shift colors. And I can add other colors in between so that it blends through. And this way, once I render the animation out, I could render it out as images. and I essentially get a whole ton of combinations. Another way to get closer, I believe, to what we were seeing there in our reference would be perhaps to duplicate our camera. Now that we have this set up, we can milk this even more. If we just start duplicating our camera, we can... I'd like to set this image as the background for the camera, but that's a bit trickier to do. So what I'll do is I'll hit tab into this object here, pick these surfaces here, and just move them, extrude them up. I'll go back into my camera view. Now I just want to move this one up. And I don't want to cover the light, but I'm going to just have to reposition my light into the scene. There we go. So back through the camera. Now from the side view, it doesn't look quite as compelling as before. However, what we were seeing over in our reference is basically a really punched in view of what they have going on there. Right, so if I really punch in to the edge of this thing here, maybe, and we get that reflection of the object, or we see the object through this one, right, we're getting a bit closer to what the reference is, where the camera really here is really punched in or zoomed into this object. There's really very little perspective, so it allows for that layering of the object. The fact that it's twisted also makes it extra interesting, but basically we can emulate that a bit more by also having our camera match or creating other cameras and quickly getting out some mock-ups. Like if I were to do something like this and bringing some focus back into the camera, so we go to the depth of field option and we change, I'm even gonna just use no focus object, and I'm just gonna mess with the distance that we're focusing in. So keeping a low f-stop for a great amount of focus, and then mess with the focal distance, make it so that this front piece is sharp and in focus, and the background is blurred out. It takes a bit longer to work with reflective materials in general, but especially like this. We can back up the camera a bit some more. Almost get just completely this soft color effect. Let me see, back to the camera. And we mess with the focal distance. Yeah. So we see what that looks like fully rendered. It's just some tests, right? On lighting, on material reflection, on camera composition. We get these glares almost look like burnouts from the film lens, which is actually not. But another thing here, lastly, as we're exporting these cameras, these render settings aren't really going to help us. The default render settings for Blender are not really set up for success. So we want to go to our performance here, render properties. We go in and we change on our render our max samples. Even with reflective materials and really soft lighting like this, I'd only go up as like 600 or 900 samples. If there's really low light, maybe for an interior architectural space or something like that, you can go up to like 2000, but that's really it. It depends on your use case, but generally like 600 to 900 for this use case is totally fine. And we'll go down to performance. We'll set our tiling to 512. 512 may work faster for you. To 56 may be better for you. And persistent data can be turned on when you have an animation and you're running through many different frames. One more thing you can do to add a bit more quality to the image is you could go to output properties and really quickly go down to post-processing, Just kidding. Not post-processing. Let's see. Color management. It's right here on the output. Open up color management. So under color management, we want to set up override, and then we'll do filmic log for basically emulating a camera sensor. And if we take a look at what that looks like, we'll see that we lost quite a bit of color. We can bring it back by setting the look to very high contrast. And we can mess with the exposure values here. And we should be seeing it happen in the scene. Oh, I see. I'm overwriting it for the render. So I'm actually going to keep it on follow scene. This is where you can overwrite it for the render apart from the live scene. But what I'll do is I'll go back to my render properties, and all the way down I have the color management that we actually see here on the left. So there you go. Filmic log kind of took away some of that color, and we can bring it back by setting it to very high contrast. And then change the exposure, so we can bring the exposure down a bit. We can increase the gamma. I can also, last thing, before hitting render, I can have the camera track a particular object. So this camera here, that's not really our top view image. I will have it, just like our lights, track to an object. So I'll have it track to, and I'll have it track to this torus, which is a moving object. So as you see here through the animation, we're tracking that object as it moves. But then what I want to do is also keyframe the camera position so that we always have some sort of like object in the way. It's like some obstacle, some of these more reflective elements. And in fact, I'm going to change. No, I'll leave this one as it is. I think I'm just gonna want to duplicate it to rotate it. I like that it's giving off light, but I'll add in another one and kind of make it a bit larger, so larger. And have it copy the glass material of the centerpiece. I keep using both keyboards if you happen to be looking through the camera. But anyhow, have it copy that glass material piece. Preview it over here. Create a new one for it. And we'll make it maybe like something deeper like that. Or like a deep blue or a deep purple. Either way. Make it a bit stronger. Nice. And the camera, the focus for this camera, I will now have it focus. Ooh, there we go. Glitched for a bit. I'll select this camera that's now tracked to that object. It's gonna follow it around. I'm gonna obviously want the focus to be focused, the depth of field to be focused on that object, so that it's, you know, in focus. But we'll lower the f-stop so we start to blur out the other elements. So this ring that's moving around has just become the focus of the scene. I'll have the camera now with its position here. I'll be able to keyframe it throughout. So I can move it up here, for example. So I kind of punched in and set some keyframes. Then I can move over some, and I can just move the camera over to the other side and maybe higher above. Just generally closer. There we go. Keyframe that position. Move it over again. Maybe closer and to a lower position. Ooh, that's starting to get really interesting. So right there. Ooh, I messed up. I didn't move forward. So I gotta move forward first and then move my camera where I want it. So I had it, yeah. So, ooh, that's even better. Okay. And then keyframe that position. So what we're doing here is basically by having the camera track this object, it's always our focus. and we can call it, you know, the main character of our study here, the main subject of our study. But just have the camera run through all these different positions. There we go. So that by the end of the animation, such as there, if I now play this, we'll see we're actually running through a lot of different singular images. It's actually pretty surreal. And it's not too bad when it gets out of the bounds of the background too. So yeah, there we go. We just did some compositions, some shapes, some color, some light, some textures, all kind of following a particular aesthetic. And then you could do this to kind of milk it a little bit more and get, you know, some interesting views. Call them, you know, your studies. Visual studies, right? Ultimately, this is like just testing out what it kind of looks like to create a 3D animation that can be taken to another level creatively. We can, once we render this out also, if we happen to have, since we have Blender Kit, once we render out this animation, which if I render out just one image, I'll hit save it into somewhere you can find it. In this case, we'll save it in today's stream folder. Say I brought in an iPhone now. If I go to models and I brought an iPhone in from Blender Kit, there we go. Here's an iPhone 13. We can place that on the surface there. Let's go back to our first camera that we set up, not with the animation, and find our iPhone. I mean, the iPhone could have also been now what gets animated in. But essentially what I want to show you here is we can bring in that render onto the phone. We'll go into the shader editor. We'll investigate this material like we did the other one, selecting the phone. There it is. And we see that if we go over here to the materials, it's just a glass texture, right? So we don't want to mess with that. We want to keep it glass, but we'll add a mix shader. And with our mix shader, or even into the color node, we'll see we can bring in an image texture. And let's first try that, plugging it into the base color. Depending on the parameters here of the material, it may look good or it may not. We'll hit open and bring in that render that we have. So it's not really helping out the glass. The glass seems to have to stay white. So we'll bring this over. We'll actually make this into, we'll plug this into an emission shader so that we can collect that color into the emission and then plug that into our mix shader. And we're not getting the results that I was expecting. Why is that? If I collect the color, it's not doing the proper thing. Oh, I think it dropped in an emission anyway. We can do the same thing as before. We'll do Control T to set up our mapping here so that we can use the texture coordinate, the appropriate texture coordinate for that model. This is our glass. What am I missing here? We've got phone color. This should just be working right out of the box. We'll start from scratch. We'll forget about the fact that it's glass. And we'll just go ahead and bring in the image texture. Hit open. Open that file. Plug it in for the surface. Still, it's not looking right. So we'll add a contrast node right there. See if increasing the contrast brings us our colors. So this is what we should be seeing, what's on the right hand side. But if we hit Control M here, or sorry, Control T, getting the wrong shortcut again, we can see here we're not really getting, there we go. I mean, we got to change, the model just didn't come properly UV unwrapped. Otherwise, we'd be able to put in, or it wasn't unwrapped at all. But that's fine. We'll be able to adjust for that here. So generated seems to be the closest one. Or if we can hit tab into this object and hit U, unwrap. If we see what that looks like now, we can go to our UV editing node. And now it's getting a bit more technical. But we see it's actually a mirrored object. So we want to apply that mirror modifier and hit tab A, U, unwrap again, so we get the full phone. There we go. That's what I get for assuming that assets come ready for you to use off the internet. Okay, so now that I know this node setup works, and I'll hit Control Shift T, and I see I have that there. I'll hit Control C to copy this. Let's see if I can't backtrack far enough to where we get our glass back. It seems like we can't. Is that right? Yep. We're stuck here. So I will redo all my steps. There we go. We'll keep our contrast. But also, we're not actually plugging in a shader here. So we could do much simpler. We can do a glass BSDF, which is a little easier. And then we can also do an emission shader, so that it gives off some light. And we bring back that mix shader. Okay, so now we can bring up the intensity of the light coming off the screen. And in this scene, I can take it a step further and glitching out for a sec. There we go. I shouldn't be rendering at full quality. Once things start to get a little spicy here, we want to bring down our scene format to 30% quality here, so that the rendered view just kind of runs a bit more smoothly. We go into keyframes here. We can just have this thing slowly rotate. So we'll have the rotation saved here. We'll go all the way to the end, and we'll rotate it in a particular axis all the way to whatever the other value might be. So for it to face the other way, for example. So we see it rotating there quite slowly. But if we had the camera moving, right, we're like basically doing the full mock-up now, where we actually have the phone in the shot itself now. And there's your product ad. Anywho, it's just a mock-up. The whole point is here we can do the same thing to this camera as we did to the other one, and just start rendering it out as an animation. So there we have another. Might take some time off screen and tune this a bit more, or just render out the whole animation from the other camera and see if I get any useful shots. You know, if I perhaps just duplicate this camera and have this camera focus on the iPhone. So we'll keep the same movements, but we'll focus in on the phone. Move that a bit higher. So here's that camera. It'll have the same movements as the other one, but on other object constraints, we'll instead select, where did my iPhone go? There it is. Select the empty that accompanies the phone, or the object. And we make sure that the depth of field also follows that one object. Where is it? Depth of field, here we are. Focused on the phone. Nice. So we get over the top of it, and we kind of never quite get under it because of the way that it's rotating and the camera's moving. So I'm actually gonna just move these two keyframes and reverse them, or yeah, punch them closer together, and then duplicate this one here. So we'll have a bit more rotation, but we'll be able to catch the phone in focus. All right, making sure that this camera here has, so it has the glass in focus. Yeah, but we'll increase our f-stop a little bit just for this one. So this is what we're basically rendering out. And I accidentally overrid my surreal image from earlier, so I'll pick a new one here, such as that. And we can also have a video rather than a rendering actually be playing on the screen of the iPhone. But for that, we'd actually have to render out the whole image. So before we hit animate, I'm just gonna get out. So we have 3 cameras set up right now. One camera is set up from the top. I can actually cycle these here, right? Which is our main view, which is where we first set up our composition for this entire thing. So that looks like this, right? This is our main shot with everything moving. Don't know if I can play the animation while it's rendering. I cannot. We have this other camera that follows the ring, this one here, that moves all the way around. And it's really out of focus, or it has really low focus, and it has these wacky movements to basically create these different effects by having the light pass through the objects in different ways and creating different reflections. So it's our surreal camera. And then we have our dynamic camera, which we just copied to have the same movements as the other one, but keep focused on the iPhone, right? So if we, again, save this image now for background, iPhone, save, we go over to, whoops, we go over to the iPhone, go into shader editor here, and switch that image over into our newly rendered background. Control save. Switch over to our iPhone camera. There it is, and we've hit rendered. We now have that new image on there. So we'll notice also that the camera points upward, leaving the iPhone a bit, without any background. So what I'll do is I'll actually make this bigger. It's just going to be easier. Move my different edges. Let's see what that looks like over here in rendered view. So I just have like a even box gradient. Perhaps even for this object over here, I can add more colors to the gradient just to tweak that background. Okay, and I also need to cap it, because we see there that when we're looking upward, it's getting cut off. So it's real rough at the moment, but there we go. Now we don't have any empty background. That was a cool shot there of the iPhone logo. Maybe I should have it focus on the logo instead of the screen. if the logo is an object I can focus on. Well, that's kind of nice, having some of the edge out of focus and some of the edge in focus. And here we have this glare coming off of this object here. So like there'll be some unusable frames like these where this other object is cutting up in front. So we can always tweak that a little bit with the camera. So as we have this animation playing, like this start is very awkward. We'll just on that keyframe. Now I can start working in wireframe view. Move that camera into the box. It looks like it's sitting. I don't know what's going on. Why is it all blue? Is it just way too far away? Yeah, okay. So we can bring it closer, kind of start out right here. And save new keyframes for those positions. Now let it play a little bit. Like that's a nice shot. But if I rotated the camera here, so I select the camera and I hit, well, can't rotate the camera. I can only move the camera. So I can move the camera a little bit like this and just make that one position a bit more interesting. Save that. So it's kind of like a quick transition right here. Focusing in on the logo, maybe like right there. That's an awkward position. So we can move the camera a bit up and a bit further away. It works out that the iPhone is blue also. That's kind of nice. Bring some purple into the shot. There we go. Save that keyframe and then move over. That's very good. You can move the camera a bit further away to show the full iPhone and some more of the shapes. Okay, and for the last frame, we'd want to move the camera down. And away. Maybe even, yeah, maybe for the end, let's actually hide out the phone. We don't see the phone anymore. But I did like, so rather than doing that there, I did like a position we had over here. So I'm going to save something from around this point. There we go. A bit more rotation. So that we ease into that one at the end. Nice. And then, you know, this could serve even to like then focus in on, you know, like the port and like if it were an ad, let's say, like if you were looking at it from a certain angle where you could call out different features of the phone and whatnot. So we took it all the way to a proof of concept for a product here, which is a little extra, but we did the abstract and we proved the concept. So with that, I'm going to call it a night. I'm going to leave it rendering this image out. Always feel free to ask questions in this time. I mean, I offer it throughout the live stream, but if you're watching, you want to ask a question on there. I should be getting questions from both YouTube and LinkedIn on this thing I'm using. But I haven't seen any activity from LinkedIn, so. And if there's no questions, I'll just let you know that I'll be back on tomorrow at 8. I'll try to sort through my technical issues so that we don't run into anything that delays us or that puts me without audio in the beginning. But yeah, thanks for tuning into this one. Tomorrow, probably going to take a lighter, not lighter as in shorter, but lighter as in more quiet or less instructional approach, as I'll be working on the vehicle for the Endless Engines competition, right? But yeah, so I'll see you there tomorrow if you'd care to join. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think in the chat. And till next time, signing off.